So for anyone who has not yet met me at this conference, my name is Jessie, and today I'm going to be telling you about some tales of adding oAuth login with Bsky to an existing open source commons tool. I'm going to take you through that process, kind of hopefully give you an idea of what I experienced along the way. This is kind of my outline of all the stages. So to give you a little bit of background, first of all, about myself and the project, Coral by Vox Media is an open source commons tool that is currently in use on news sites, big and small, all over the world. I personally was an SRE on the Coral team a few years ago, and so I'm very familiar with this particular application. And Coral already has a bunch of auth strategies. So my initial idea started because I personally run a micro SaaS where I offer Coral as a service to people. And I wanted to integrate a login with Bsky button so I could have that on my service. Being that Coral already has a couple of oAuth 2 clients baked in, I thought, this is going to be really easy, right? I will just copy one of Coral's existing, like Facebook or Google oAuth 2 clients, make a new one, and this is going to be a great idea. So my initial assumptions, TLDR, were a little incorrect about how easy this was going to be. I honestly thought that the hardest part was going to be making all the login buttons and like adding the config to the admin so you could enable this new feature. So after about a week of doing that, I start with my enthusiastic new branch, and I just go start making buttons and adding things. And as I get to the part where I'm starting to actually like clone the authenticators, I'm realizing none of this is how any of this works. So this is my first real introduction into what are the differences in ATproto oAuth versus the oAuth 2 clients that we're more familiar with from previous social media. So at this point, I realized that there were a couple of assumptions I had made that were faulty. So the first one is, because an ATproto profile can live anywhere on the internet, not just at bsky.social, you don't have one redirect URL that you're going to send that user back to. The other one is that there is no, as was mentioned in a talk earlier about oAuth, if you want to enable oAuth with GitHub, the very first step is to follow that long list of instructions to set yourself up as a GitHub client. There is no such thing of doing that. You would not want to have to go to every single PDS host and say, I'm making a new app that's going to have login. So you actually have to publish your own client ID and secret keys at a client metadata JSON route. This is not something Coral was doing with its other oAuth clients, so this was something that was going to have to be added in. So at this point, having spent a little bit of time on this project and now wondering if it was even a good idea, I needed to get some external validation. So I paused and I did two things to validate whether or not this was something that the rest of the world besides myself actually wanted. The first one was I went to Coral and I was like, hey, thinking about this, is this something that you would want and that your users would want? And they were like, yes, absolutely, please help us. And then the other one was I submitted this call for proposals for this lightning talk. And having been selected, that kind of gave me some indication that this might be something that the ATproto community would also be interested in. So at this point, I was like, cool, all right, you can't stop me. I'm going to make this be a thing. Having figured out that the differences were there, I wanted to get more familiar myself with how the ATproto oAuth flow worked first. So one of my first steps here, going back to this project kind of now after getting that buy-in from the other communities, was to clone the Statusphere example app and make my own little app that did absolutely nothing but oAuth. I ignored all the Firehose stuff, all the lexicon stuff, and just made a button that I could click that would say login. And once I could log in to my own Bsky account with my, do that locally and have that working, then I was ready to go back to Coral and start trying to figure out, okay, how is this going to work in the Coral application? Meanwhile, Coral had written some new integration tests around their auth strategies, and it was politely suggested that I branch off of that new branch to incorporate those new integration tests. So there was a little bit of cherry picking and like some redoing of the branches. And then along the way, I ran into a couple of interesting errors. There's one that was, if you are not correctly passing things into the client, then you'll get this cannot resolve handle, because if you don't tell it that it's an @proto generic scope, then it's not going to know that that's an @proto handle that you need to, that it's trying to resolve, and so you'll get a cannot resolve handle error. The other one is, at first in my local app, I was being a little lazy with my state store, and that doesn't work. You have to actually store state so that it can be retrieved, otherwise you'll get a 401. So I'm not going to go through the individual steps here of what the flow looks like when it works, but I have documented them, and this is a gist that's on my GitHub. I'm going to share a link to that on Bsky as well, so you all will be able to see this. There's like some links in here and stuff, but basically this is what the flow looks like when it works. It is only different in the ways that you are creating that client metadata JSON, and then you are getting your redirect based on what the handle was. So you're going to figure out where to send the user for that authorization step based on the data that was retrieved from their handle. I was really hoping that this would be all done and completed by the time of the talk, but of course, my plans and reality are sometimes different. And so at this point, I am still working with the Coral team to get this all the way through their QA process, and it is going to be available probably in the next couple of weeks, but it is not all the way out yet. A few things that I can answer, like questions that I can answer now that I was not able to answer before. Would I have attempted this if I had known how long it would take? Definitely not. Was it worth it though, and would I do it again? And the answer is absolutely yes. I have learned so much about this protocol and just kind of the future of what these things can do that absolutely I would do this again. And a few takeaways, what you should know before starting your own version of this project, especially if you have an existing application and you want to do something really, like you think it's going to be really simple to just do oAuth. There is no such thing as adding just Bsky login. You are adding login with @proto. This is actually something that I think is really important, and we haven't quite figured out what the messaging on this to the end user looks like, because right now the button is going to say login with Bsky, and that is not an accurate representation. I think people who are currently hosting or self-hosting or have moved their handle to a not.bsky or bsky.social address are probably aware of the fact that they're somewhere else, but other users are not going to be sophisticated enough to get that difference. So I think that's something that's an important thing to note, like you're not really just adding oAuth with Bsky. Definitely I've mentioned the whole thing about you have to issue your client ID and secrets. You don't go to an oAuth provider and register as a client app. I used the oAuth client node NPM package, and I would highly recommend you do this yourself or do this instead of writing your own oAuth 2 clients. If you have written your own oAuth 2 clients in the past, you will not have to do that this time, but you also will not be able to use or reuse your existing ones. There's also something when you're doing the client ID from a local host versus when you're actually doing that from production. There is a little bit of a gotcha there. It's called out in the docs, but make sure you're encoding your URIs. And then there are 2 other NPM packages that I used for convenience. They were Syntax and API, and I would highly recommend everybody look at those as well. So that is my tales of adding oAuth login to an existing open source app. And this will be available on GitHub for anybody who wants to find the links. Cool.
Thank you so much, Jessie.
I feel like I rushed through that, so I don't know if I have any idea how much time I have left.
That's good.
All right,
you
sweet.
You did a great job.
Awesome.
Thank you.